2 o'clock on a Monday. Montgomery House holds its breath the way a patient does before bad news. Crying pours through the upper corridor, raw, rasping, the sound of two infants who have forgotten what silence feels like. Mary Collins climbs the oak stairs with her cleaning caddy tucked tight to her ribs, repeating the rule she set herself the day she took this job. Keep your head down, keep your hands busy, keep your heart out of other people's grief. She fails at the last one every time. 25, slight as a reed, Mary stops on the half landing to wipe her brow. 3 weeks in this house, and still the sound cleaves straight through her. The twins have crept for hours today. Yesterday, longer. The day before, longer still. Baby lotion, sour milk, and sterilizing fluid hang in the air like a tired truce. Somewhere, a lullaby mobile turns without conviction, tinny notes snagging against the wail. Alexander Montgomery, 34 and suddenly older, appears in the corridor like a man who has mislaid himself. His hair is a ruin, his jaw blue with exhaustion, his eyes the color of sleepless dawns. From the other end strides Mrs. Agnes Whitaker, housekeeper for 2 decades, notebook hugged to her side with the devotion other people give rosaries. "Sir, you must rest," she says in that brisk North Country way, and Alexander lets out a small, humorless laugh. Rest with the 2 daughters who cry so hard the skirting boards hum? What kind of father lies down while his children drown in their own lungs? Mary hovers on the nursery threshold. She knows she should not cross it. There are boundaries, and Dr. Victoria Vale drew them in neat black ink. But grief is a tide that ignores signs. She steps in. 2 cots, rose and a pale blue, sit like promises the house can't quite keep. Soft toys stir with stitched patience. Mary picks up a fallen muslin, presses it to her chest, and for a heartbeat, a memory moves through her 4 months along, a blurry scan tucked in a cheap frame, a name already chosen. Then the hospital's quiet, that violent, efficient quiet that takes your future in 2 polite hands. Her little one would have been the twins' age now. The thought is a blade wrapped in velvet. The iron gates clatter below. Tires on gravel. Alexander has dashed the babies to hospital again. For 1 hour, the house remembers what quiet is. When he returns, quiet abandons them at once. He barrels into the nursery with Isabella in his arms, face crimson, fists knotted, throat scoured by crying while Sophie wails from the pram. Another specialist on the phone, another polished shrug. We've tried everything. There is nothing else to try. Alexander's fist touches the wall with a dull, helpless thud. "I am a useless father," he says, and the sentence trembles as it leaves him. It happens, then a tiny, disobedient miracle nobody ordered and nobody trusts. Mary, crouched to rescue a perfume bottle she has knocked from the dresser in her fluster, looks up at Isabella, and before permission or sense can catch her, opens her arms. "May I?" she asks, soft as a church aisle. Alexander's judgment is eroded by months of failure. He surrenders the baby. The change is not gradual. It is a switch thrown in the dark. Isabella's sob breaks. Her little chest hiccups, then settles. Her eyes puffy, furious, find Mary's face and simply watch. Sophie's howl stutters, tilts, fades, as if the stranger in the room isn't a stranger at all. Mary sways, slow and sure, the way her gran did in a dim kitchen in Leeds with the radio murmuring and rain arguing at the window. Perhaps it is only a steady heartbeat and a pair of hands that never ask to be thanked. Perhaps it is something you cannot type up in a report. For the first time in months, both babies sleep as if sleep is a right, not a rumor. Mrs. Whitaker appears in the doorway and crosses herself out of sheer surprise, then snaps the gesture into something more Anglican and sensible. Alexander's face comes apart in a smile so fragile it looks painful. "How did you?" he whispers, as if sound itself might wake the spell. Mary has no answer. She only keeps breathing like a metronome, as if the room has been waiting for this particular rhythm all along. Footsteps, quick and sure, climb the stairs, heels that know how to turn a corridor into a consultation room. Victoria Vale arrives with her white coat unrumpled and her certainty buttoned to the throat. She stops mid-sentence. 2 sleeping infants, a father briefly human again, a maid with a baby melted against her shoulder. Alexander, still whispering to appease the miracle, says, "Victoria, you won't believe this, Mary. She made them sleep." The doctor's pleasant smile cools a degree, like china after hot tea. 3 years in this household, poised between guardian and something more. 3 months of weeping infants that made the father wholly hers, in fear and dependency. And now this girl in second-hand shoes has undone it in a breath. In the corridor, Victoria's voice lowers, careful, authoritative sound of scalpel on silk. Newborns are fragile. Untrained hands carry germs. Cleaning fluids and perfumes can trigger reactions. What looks like a cure might be a delayed harm. She is a pediatrician of 15 years. She knows risk when she sees it. Alexander, battered by sleeplessness and the parade of expert failures, lets doubt root where gratitude had just tried to bloom. Mary lays Isabella down with a reverence that has nothing to do with class and everything to do with love that has nowhere else to live. The babies sleep on, sweet as a promise. The house, for once, does not argue. And yet between the scent of talc and the scratch of Mrs. Whitaker's pencil in her little book, a question begins to breathe. What if the thing meant to heal has been all along the thing that hurts, or the person some people think shouldn't heal at all? By late afternoon, the house folds into that peculiar lull after a storm, when the curtains seem to breathe and even the floorboards hold their peace. Victoria Vale stands at the nursery window, hands clasped neatly at the small of her back, the posture taught in her first year on the pediatric ward. When medicine runs out of tricks, posture mustn't. In the glass, she sees 3 faint ghosts layered one inside another. The twins asleep at last. Alexander hovering like a reprimand he's preparing for himself. Mary at the doorway, half-stepped back, as if the paint might protect her. "It's encouraging they're resting," Victoria says, voice pitched to a soft authority. But we mustn't confuse coincidence with causation. She lays out the possibilities like instruments on a trolley. The car journey may have fatigued them. The antipyretic could have reached peak effect. Ambient temperature is optimal. The white noise machine is finally doing its job. Each clause is a small, tidy brick in a wall built around one sentence she refuses to permit. "I could not give him this peace, and you did." Alexander clings to the word encouraging as if it were a rung on a ladder. "Whatever it was, let's not break it," he murmurs, aware of how childlike it sounds beside Victoria's grammar of risk. He also knows his daughters are sleeping rarer than summer snow, and he would mortgage the roof if someone swore the slates were responsible. Victoria turns from the window with a smile of perfect calibration. She does not repeat what a consultant said in St. Mary's Canteen last week. Sometimes babies settle for the wrong people. The phrase landed like a fishbone and has not shifted since. The wrong people. She looks just briefly at Mary's small, steady hands. Mary offers no theory. Words aren't her instruments. Touch and timing are. Her grandmother's lessons live in her muscles. Keep the house warm. Keep the kettle honest. Keep your sway slow enough for breath to follow it. She retreats one pace, then another, as if her absence might act like disinfectant. "If you prefer," she says to Alexander, "I'll keep the two downstairs this evening." Victoria's smile approves. Something in Alexander's expression doesn't. Dusk draws a nervous routine over the house, as if by placing events in order, they can be made to behave. In the kitchen, Mrs. Agnes Whitaker nudges the clock 5 minutes fast, so supper arrives before hunger can become crossness, even in grown men with threadbare tempers. On the pine table, she opens the small ledger that has served this family through burst pipes, broken hearts, and one unforgettable winter of power cuts, and rules a new column in a firm schoolmistress hand. Sleep. Minutes from 1900, she says, pencil at the ready. If we don't measure, we'll only remember what hurts. She notes the first 40 without interruption, then another 20, then miracle upon miracle, 35 more. Each time the pencil moves, Mary glances up from the sink, as if that small sound were a charm to keep the world polite. Alexander patrols the landing like a sentry. Relief, he discovers, is a timid animal moved too suddenly, and it bolts. He peeks into the nursery to find Sophie slack with dreams, lips in a perfect little O. He holds his breath and counts to 10 like a superstitious schoolboy. Under the hush, the old panic twitches the midnight commands that have run him ragged for months. Check the thermometer, change the swaddles, Google symptoms until your stomach curdles. Repeat. He presses thumb and forefinger to his eyes and tells himself to stand down. He is a father, not an alarm. At the breakfast bar, Victoria updates the care log with consultant's neatness. "I propose a short observation tomorrow," she says, not looking up, as though harmless plans require no eye contact. Pediatric suite at St. Mary's, controlled environment, routine swabs, nothing intrusive. She lets the syllables do their gentle work. Controlled, routine, nothing. Words polished until they shine with safety. Alexander nods. Nodding has become his method of remaining vertical. "If it proves what helps," he says, and both women hear the same tremor. What helps is the only altar he acknowledges now. "It will prove what is safe," Victoria replies. Mrs. Whitaker adds a discreet star to the margin, her private liturgy. She doesn't announce the older truth she's learned from kitchens and corridors. The body often knows before the mind permits belief. She feels it in the weight of the rooms, in the way doors close without slamming, in the softened cadence of footsteps on the landing. The house is no longer braced for impact. It is listening for a lullaby. By nightfall, the proposal has shape and signatures. Victoria drafts the consent forms with that crisp NHS clarity that soothes more than it explains. Brief observation, standard infection control, presence limited to credentialed staff, consent revocable at any time. It isn't an attack. It's policy, the polite cousin of power. She adds a sentence about minimizing confounding variables and another about control of environmental stimuli. The paragraphs sit handsomely on the page, the way rules do when they are sure of themselves. Before she leaves, Victoria asks for one last look at the nursery. The twins lie like formal proofs of peace. Even the owl-shaped humidifier seems to purr. "For tonight," she whispers, voice pitched for cathedrals and sleeping children. "Let's maintain distance. In the morning, we'll know better what helps and what harms." The sentence is tied like a small bow and presented as care. And Alexander accepts it because it is late and because exhaustion is a soft kind of coercion, and because accepting what is offered is sometimes the only way to finish a day. He turns to Mary. "Could you keep to the ground floor?" He doesn't quite meet her eyes. The request isn't cruel, but it carries the ache of a door being drawn gently to. Mary's nod is small and exact, the nod of someone who has learnt to remove her presence like a stain. Of course, sir." She gathers her caddy, tucks the cloth into its handle with a neatness out of proportion to the task, and leaves the nursery as quietly as a thought that refuses to make a fuss. On the stairs, Victoria pauses and listens. The house breathes, no wail, no frantic shuffle. She allows herself just for a second to imagine that tomorrow the monitors and printouts will give her back authorship, that facts will fall into line, that the hierarchy of care will right itself, that a woman with ordinary hands will return to her ordinary scale. She descends with the satisfaction of someone who has placed a chess piece no one can reasonably argue with. Downstairs, Mrs. Whitaker closes her ledger and slides it beneath the battered cookbook for shepherd's pie, as if data and comfort belong together. "Eat," she instructs Alexander, who hasn't noticed his hunger. Mary stands by the back door, one hand on the frame as though asking the house's permission to leave. "Sleep if you can," she says to nobody in particular, which is sometimes the kindest way to say it. The first hour passes unbroken. At the hinge of the second, Sophie lets out a timid, interrogative sound, the sort of half-cry that's trying on its voice. Alexander freezes in the corridor and counts again. The sound curls, gathers, climbs. In the guest room, Mary lies on the borrowed duvet, staring at the ceiling. She hums under her breath very low, barely there, unwilling to disobey, unable not to answer. The tune threads upwards through joists and plaster. Sophie's sound falters. For a heartbeat, quiet returns. Then the house remembers the habit it has learnt. Sophie cries full-throated, furious, convinced. Isabella follows, as if they have rehearsed it. The night opens its jaw. Alexander reaches for the nursery door, stops, reaches again. Victoria's instructions are neat in his head, lines of tidy type. His daughter's distress is messy as floodwater. He chooses obedience. He doesn't call Mary. He stands with his back to the wall and lets the crying pass through him like a tide through shingle, At 2 in the morning, when the air tastes of metal and fatigue, his phone buzzes. Victoria's message, hold until morning, they are safe. You're doing the right thing. He wants to believe it. He wants to be the man who can outlast the night on a principle. But there is a law older than policy that lives in the bones of parents and those who have tried to be. It will not be unlearned. He walks to the guest room door and almost knocks. He doesn't. He returns to the nursery. The crying rises, falls, rises again. He leans his forehead against the wood and thinks bitterly, like a man who is both coward and martyr in the same breath. Tomorrow we'll learn what helps and what harms. And somewhere between the thin walls and the thud of his own pulse, a fault line opens the line between safety as a policy and safety as a presence. Morning arrives without mercy, thin light, colder rooms, and the chalky taste of having outlasted nothing. De Victoria Vale returns with the air of someone bringing order to a place that has forgotten the word. She sets a plastic folder on the kitchen table, flips it open, and the house acquires new commandments in tidy type. Until we complete observation, she says, we'll adopt interim measures. Interim sounds gentle. Measures do not. Gloves for anyone entering the nursery, masks for non-clinical staff, no perfumes, no scented detergents, no candles with kindly names, doors to remain ajar for airflow, white noise machine to be fixed at level 3, handling to be limited to Alexander and credentialed professionals, all other presents to be observational only, 2 meters distance. Mrs. Agnes Whitaker copies the list into her ledger, jaw set, pen scratching like a small protest that refuses to become a quarrel. Mary Collins washes her hands at the Belfast sink for the 3rd time in 20 minutes, though she has touched nothing at all. When she turns off the tap, her knuckles are pink and clean enough to pass any test you might invent. Understood, she says. She has learned how to fold herself into rules until she becomes the seam nobody notices. On the landing, Victoria tapes a laminated scene at the nursery threshold. Infection control in operation. The bold capitals make the room feel as if it belongs to a different kind of building. This is for everyone's reassurance, she adds, and the sentence lands like a blanket, too stiff to warm. Alexander nods, because nodding holds him together. He adjusts his mask, then adjusts it again, as if the right angle might make him a better father. The twins are drowsy. The wreckage of the night has left them limp, but the new stillness is not peace. It is a held breath. Mary stands precisely at the taped line, a small figure in a plain cardigan, watching Isabella's chest rise and fall with the concentration usually reserved for prayer. By mid-morning, the nursery has the tuned blandness of a clinic. The curtains are drawn to a scientifically approved sliver. The room smells of alcohol wipes and warm plastic. The owl humidifier emits its steady purr like a device that has finally been promoted to relevance. Victoria moves through with a clipboard and timing app, logging feeds, nappies, temperatures, heart rates, oxygen sats numbers that behave unlike people. Remember, presence can stimulate, she says, and indicates the hallway with a cool tilt of her hand. Mary obeys. She positions herself 2 meters back and hums nothing, says nothing, becomes almost nothing, a watchful absence. At first, the twins doze, skitter, settle. The machine purrs, the clock ticks. Then, as if the house itself tires of good intentions, Sophie's mouth creases into a warning, "Oh!" Alexander leans forward on a reflex. Victoria's palm rises. "Wait!" The moment stretches until it thins. Sophie's warning unfurls into sound. Isabella startles and decides to agree. Crying lifts, threads, tightens two small instruments tuning to the same terrible note. Victoria increases the white noise. She adjusts the room temperature by 1 careful degree. She suggests Alexander hold Sophie while she observes Isabella's response. The maneuvers are intelligent, defensible, almost convincing. In the corridor, Mary presses her nails into her palm hard enough to leave half-moons. She keeps her eyes on the floorboards and counts a rhythm only she can hear. It is the rhythm that once lived in a council flat kitchen, where a kettle did more therapy than most men, and where her grand sway had a geography of its own. 3 counts left, 2 right. Breathe on the 4. She doesn't move. The rules, after all, are clear. She does what she's good at. She disappears. The twins do not. They escalate. The sound isn't simply loud. It is intimate, as if grief has found the exact frequency of their walls. Alexander's mask darkens at the mouth, where his breath has turned to damp. "What do I do?" he asks, and the question is not addressed to any person so much as to the absurdity of life. "Hold," says Victoria, and notes something brisk on her chart, the way a captain might jot coordinates while the sea goes about its bullying. By late afternoon, tempers fray like cheap cloth. Mrs. Whitaker plates shepherd's pie and sets it beneath cling film no one lifts. Alexander tries to nap and fails at even that modest task. Victoria conducts a second round of checks and finds everything within acceptable limits except the human beings. The rules are doing their elegant best. The people refuse to become elegant. At 6, a small accident happens, the sort that doesn't warrant a footnote in medical literature, only a sentence in a life. As Mary passes the nursery with a basket of folded muslins, Isabella's cry hits a note that slices through learned obedience. Mary stops. She does not cross the threshold. She does not touch. She does the smallest, most dangerous thing. She hums, low, the way one might hum to stabilize a glass on a wobbly table. A lullaby without words, barely louder than breath. Isabella's pitch drops by a hair. Sophie's gasp transforms into a sigh that might decide, with encouragement, to become sleep. For 3 seconds, the room tilts towards calm, like a boat catching the right wind at last. "Mary," Victoria says sharply, turning. The sharpness is real, so is the fear behind it. We agreed. No auditory stimuli from non-clinical staff. The sentence is bureaucratically precise and therefore unforgiving. Mary's hands tighten around the basket until the top muslin wrinkles. "Apologies," she says, and means it. She steps back as if the air itself has scalded her. But rules have a momentum once they are set in motion. "This isn't about fault," Victoria continues. "It's about safety. Please keep to the ground floor until tomorrow." The politeness is immaculate. The effect is banishment. Mrs. Whitaker opens her mouth, closes it, and writes a tiny note in the ledger that looks, to anyone who isn't her, like a dot. Alexander watches Mary's face as she receives the instruction. He thinks of last night's message. "You are doing the right thing. and wonders why the right thing looks so much like failure when you stand directly in front of it. "I'll be downstairs," Mary says quietly, "if you need fresh towels." The sentence tries to make itself useful because that is how she has stayed alive. She descends, each step measured, carrying the basket like a flag she refuses to drop, and the house becomes a little colder in her absence. Upstairs, the infants protest as if in defense of an invisible border. Victoria increases the white noise again. "They must learn to self-soothe," she says, as if the verb were a ladder anyone can grow on command. At 8:30, Alexander's patience tears with a small, audible sound inside his chest. He doesn't shout. Fatigue has taken that weapon along with appetite and sleep, but his voice is hoarse with something older than anger. "The rules are here, and the crying is here," he says, drawing two short lines in the air, as if a diagram might settle what bodies cannot. "I can't get from one to the other." "Hold until morning," Victoria replies, gentler now, because gentleness is cheaper than changing the plan. The observation is booked for 9. Downstairs, in the scullery, Mary folds muslins that do not need folding and stares at the dim window where her reflection looks like a person waiting to be told what name she's allowed. She hums nothing at all. The hum is inside. It sits with her like an unspent coin. And just before the hour turns, a small, sharp cry snaps from upstairs, the kind that summons people without their consent. It is followed by a tiny, frightening silence. Mini cliffhanger. Mary drops the basket and then freezes at the bottom stair, one foot hovering above the first riser, the new laminated sign gleaming under the landing light like a warning she cannot afford to disobey. The small, sharp cry cuts off, then nothing. Silence is seldom empty. This one is packed tight with terror. Alexander is through the door before thought can object. Isabella lies stunned, her mouth open without sound, the color leaching from her lips as if fright had hands. Sophie begins a ragged protest that only proves the room is still allowed to make noise. Mrs. Whitaker is already at the cot, with a steadiness she learned in a world that never made a fuss about competence. She sweeps the baby up, checks the airway, rubs the soles, says Isabella's name the way a lighthouse says the coast's name in storms. "Call," she says, and Alexander is dialing, spelling out a postcode through a throat that seems full of gravel. 2 minutes can be a decade, 8 can be a war. Mary stands at the foot of the stairs with the sign glaring like doctrine. She has been trained by life to obey rules because rules keep the poor out of trouble, but there is a law older than ink. She climbs, and step 2, 3 slow enough to count, fast enough to betray the fact that her fear has outrun the policy. The paramedics arrive with their brisk miracle of competence. Blue light stains the ceiling. Isabella coughs a desperate, glorious sound, then breathes in a thin, high whistle. Oxygen, saturation, pulse, temperature. Numbers bloom on a handheld monitor as if the child were suddenly made of mathematics. "We'll go in," the lead medic says, already writing, already moving. To Victoria Vale reached on her mobile, meets them at the curb with a hospital's worth of calm folded into her posture. The ambulance swallows them. Alexander climbs in with Isabella. Mrs. Whitaker gathers documents, bottles, emergency comforts with the speed of someone who has always known what needs doing when men do not. Mary hovers at the gate, fingers tightening around the metal, the cold printing little crescents into her skin. "I'll follow," she says. No one forbids it. No one invites it. She takes the bus because that is what her purse allows, and watches the ambulance strobe a tunnel through London's ordinary night. St. Mary's After Hours is a temple to fluorescent certainty. Signs instruct, doors swish, hands sanitize in a ritual that repeats every 10 paces. Victoria becomes impeccable in her element. She greets the registrar by name, compresses the house's last 24 hours into a set of clean sentences, slides consent across a desk with the efficiency of a seasoned litigator. Isabella is admitted for observation. A cannula blooms against the soft inside of her hand. Like a tiny, necessary bruise, the monitor's numbers steady. A sawtooth of breath smoothed by Oxygen and Tide. Likely a breath-holding spell compounded by fatigue, the registrar says, and Victoria nods a diagnosis that will hold in polite company. We'll keep her on for the night. Alexander watches the green line scroll, not quite trusting that survival can be both this mechanical and this miraculous. He kisses Isabella's hair, salt and hospital soap, and closes his eyes long enough to remember the last time he slept without bracing for impact. He cannot remember. Mary arrives at the A&E entrance with bus-warmed air in her scarf and rain cooling on her cheeks. She does not push. She waits. Eventually, Miss Whittaker finds her and presses a paper cup into her hand. "Tea," she says, because the older woman believes in certain sacraments regardless of belief. Mary sits, cup between palms, eyes fixed on a crack in the vinyl, as if the floor were whispering instructions. Victoria passes them with the purposeful glide of someone ferrying outcomes between rooms. She pauses just long enough to incline her head, acknowledgement, nothing more, and is gone again, trailing the scent of clinical order. From the observation bay comes a series of human noises that make statistics irrelevant. A baby's hiccuping gasps, a father's low, wordless murmur, the small laughter that nurses use as a stitch to keep the moment from coming apart. The numbers agree with the people. Isabella steadies. Sophie, in the waiting room pram, begins that fretful seesaw between overtired and overworried that only ends when a body who speaks her language is close enough to translate. "Back in the morning," Victoria tells Alexander, "we'll do a short, controlled session in the family room. We need to know exactly which variables trigger or calm. We mustn't rely on impressions." He nods, because nodding is the raft he has left. He looks past her shoulder to where Mary sits very still, hands cupped around a tea that has gone cold. He does not wave. He does not know the etiquette of this kind of gratitude. Hospitals rearrange time. Midnight becomes an occupation. The vending machine hums like a bored friend. Posters speak in imperatives about hand-washing and hope. Mary sits on a plastic chair that has seen more confessions than pews and stares at the family room's frosted glass until it softens into the exact fog of a different corridor. Years ago, maternity, 4th month, a technician whose voice had the careful neutrality of someone who could pack sorrow into the fewest possible words. She remembers the weight of a scan photo in her pocket and the strange, officious quiet that followed, and how, on the bus home, she held her stomach with both hands as if it might change its mind. She does not cry now. Tears feel performative beside the scale of other people's fear. She breathes. In, 2, 3, Dutch, 2, 3, 4. She hums under her breath so softly the sound is a rumor. It is not a lullaby so much as a truce. A nurse, wheeling a portable monitor towards the family room door, pauses. "Are you Mary?" she asks, not unkindly. "He keeps saying your name under his breath." The nurse tilts her head towards Alexander inside, half standing over Isabella's cot, as if worship required awkward posture. "Would you mind just from the doorway?" The nurse's voice has the lilt of someone who obeys most rules and breaks a few excellent ones. Mary rises. She stands at the crack of the door where warm, machine-breathed air meets the colder corridor. She does not cross the threshold. She rests a hand against the cool metal and lets the hum thread forward like a silk line cast very carefully into deep water. Isabella's unsettled little movements pause. The pulse trace, which has been playing a nervous jig, untangles into something nearer to a slow dance. The nurse raises her eyebrows, not surprised so much as confirmed. "There," she says softly, and makes a note that isn't entirely for the chart. Alexander looks up, relief moving through his face like weather. "Mary," he whispers, not because he doubts, but because saying the name feels like summoning a spell you aren't sure you're owed. The Victoria Vale arrives on the quiet click of professional shoes. She takes in the picture in one practiced glance. Baby settling, father less jagged, Mary at the door. The nurse offers her the observation gently. Settles when she hums. There is no challenge in it, merely data doing what data does, pointing. Victoria's smile is perfect, correct, and smaller than usual. "Thank you," she says to the nurse. And to Mary, she adds, with impeccable courtesy, "We'll incorporate controlled auditory presence in the morning session." The sentence is generous and fenced all at once. Ownership remains where policy says it does. Mary nods. She does not need ownership. She needs a child to breathe well. The hum continues, barely a sound, more a shape the air takes when someone believes in the possibility of calm. At 2:30, the family room settles into the nearest thing to peace anyone has earned for weeks. The monitor's green script writes a lullaby of its own. Alexander leans his head against the doorframe and closes his eyes. Mrs. Whitaker, on the bench beside Mary, lets her shoulder rest for the length of a prayer not addressed to anyone in particular. Mini cliffhanger. In the corridor, a junior administrator tacks tomorrow's observation schedule to a board. Beside the Montgomery name, a red asterisk appears. External presence to be restricted pending consultant review. The nurse who noticed the pulse looks at it, looks at Mary, and decides whether to tell her now or after she slept. Morning lays its thin light over St. Mary's like parchment. The red asterisk beside the Montgomery name has the quiet menace of a law stapled to a door. External presence to be restricted pending consultant review. The words don't shout. They don't need to. They give authority a place to sit and wait. Mrs. Agnes Whitaker has never liked menacing stationery. She gathers what she needs, a fountain pen she trusts, the small ledger with its sleep column, a kitchen timer that once rescued a Christmas roast, and the iron calm of a woman who has seen rules tidy away what people know. She consults the nurse with the sensible eyes, the one who noticed Isabella's pulse. Listen. Between them, in the language of nods, they shape a plan modest enough to pass beneath any asterisk. 4 blocks of time. 2 with Mary present but hands off, humming from the doorway. 2 with Mary absent and the corridor kept as blank as conscience. No touching, no crossing thresholds, no perfume, no nonsense. Variables trimmed down until even a consultant would be forced to admit they exist. "We're not proving magic," Mrs. Whitaker says, clicking the timer to the first 25 minutes. "We're proving manners. The body remembers." Alexander hovers, unsure whether gratitude counts as interference. De Victoria Vale signs the observation sheet with the impeccable flourish of someone who will not, cannot, be accused of negligence. "We'll keep this tightly controlled," she says. To Mary, she adds with careful kindness, "Your presence is permitted for the first interval. Doorway only, please. It is permission wrapped in porcelain, delicate, expensive, liable to crack if mishandled. The first interval begins at 9 on the nose. The family room settles into its mechanical purr monitors, air vents, the long exhale of the building itself. Mary stands at the doorway, shoulder to the frame, the line between inside and out, a blade she will not cross. She hums no song you could name. It's a thread pulled from somewhere private, the rhythm of a bus at night, the sway of a cue, the rise and fall of a kettle refusing to hurry. Isabella's eyelids flutter, then resolve. Sophie makes the soft, greedy sigh of a child trading fear for a sleep. On the monitor, the restless embroidery of pulse pairs down into something tidy enough to trust. Mrs. Whitaker notes without romance. 9:03, calm establishes. 09:07, minor stir, self-corrects, sats hold. She draws a small char in the margin because the habit comforts her. Interval 2 removes Mary. The doorway is clean, the corridor prim. Within 7 minutes, the twins begin that familiar duet. One voice queries, the other agrees, both escalate. Victoria ticks boxes, raises white noise, shifts temperature by a degree. The numbers on the screen resist the idea that human beings can be arranged like furniture. Mrs. Whitaker writes, 0919 agitation rises. 92 intervention ineffective. 0926 crying peaks. She does not add what her bones know, that the room feels wrong when certain people are missing. Interval 3 reinstates Mary's presence again. Hands off, voice low, nothing dramatic, nothing anyone could sensationalize. The babies tilt back towards ease. The nurse, with the sensible eyes, pretends to adjust a drip and murmurs, "There," under her breath, the way a gardener says it when a plant takes root where it ought. Alexander's face loosens, the strictures of the night giving way to something like belief. He does not thank Mary. Thanks feels crass when a child is learning to breathe well. He simply stays near his daughters and counts breaths without needing to. Interval 4 repeats absence. The pattern, by now, has the plain authority of weather. Mary leans her head against the cool corridor wall and refuses to interpret it as triumph. She has no appetite for winning. She wants a method her betters can bear to write down. By midday, they have enough to call a pattern without blushing. Mrs. Whitaker totals minutes, plots a line rough and homely, but a line nonetheless. Presence correlates with settling, absence correlates with rise in distress. No touching involved, no breach of thresholds, nothing to offend the red asterisk's delicate sensibilities. She flips the ledger to a clean page and begins a second column. Underneath she adds, smaller, doorway only. Victoria approaches, clipboard immaculate. She has watched every interval with a focus that is both generous and territorial. The data are stubborn. The room's behavior argues its case in numbers as well as size. She is too honest to ignore it and too experienced to surrender ownership without compensation. We'll formalize auditory presence, she says, pen hovering. Controlled duration, limited frequency to avoid dependency. The language is the sound of a fence being moved 6 inches and described as a new field. As she speaks, her gaze lands just for a beat on the open ledger, stars in the margins, times, notes, a small hand-drawn axis where sleep climbs when hum is present. It is not a challenge, it is domestic empiricism, the kind with jam stains on the back pages. Victoria's mouth flattens, not in contempt, exactly something more complex, more human. She looks from the ledger to Mary, from Mary to Alexander, from Alexander to the twins whose chests lift in little unison. "Let me photograph that," Victoria says, an offer that sounds like a request. "We'll attach it to the file." Mrs. Whitaker hesitates. Knowledge has a way of changing shape when it's uploaded. Still, she turns the book so the light falls cleanly. The doctor's phone clicks. The ledger becomes pixels. The experiment no one admits to acquires a shadow life in the hospital's immaculate cloud. A junior administrator appears in the doorway with a furrowed brow and a stapled packet. "Update from legal," she says to Victoria, lowering her voice out of courtesy to the sleeping, "on non-credentialed involvement." Victoria skims the top page, face unreadable. When she looks up, her smile is clinically kind and colder by a degree. "We'll need to tighten language," she says gently. "Nothing immediate will change." Mary feels the draft before the door has even fully opened to the corridor. She doesn't need to read the paper to know what it prefers. She straightens, smoothing nothing from her cardigan, and waits for the news to arrive in a tone that will claim to be neutral. Mini cliffhanger. As the twins breathe evenly and the monitors write their small green lullaby, Victoria sets her pen to the consent addendum and pauses over a line that will either name Mary's hum as a permitted intervention or reduce it to background noise. The consent addendum sits between them like a delicate bone that might snap if anyone speaks too loudly. To Victoria Vale taps the margin with her pen. "Auditory presence permitted," she reads aloud, then adds a clause in neat capitals. "Controlled duration. Doorway only, no physical contact." The words are precise, life-saving in their way, and yet they sound like handcuffs, politely offered. In the hospital, family room's kitchenette, Mrs. Agnes Whitaker sets the kettle to its steady sermon. "Tea solves us less than people claim," she says, "but it gives them time to say what they mean." She slides a mug towards Mary Collins, who is standing with the posture of someone halfway between apology and resolve. Victoria's gaze is level. "Mary, I'm formalizing what clearly helps, but you must understand why it needs boundaries. Infants can form associations that become dependencies. If your presence is the only route to settling, We trapped the family in a single point of failure." Her tone is textbook sensible. Her eyes betray a glint of something both sharper and sadder, ownership, skidding on the wet surface of evidence. Mary takes the mug, lets the steam kiss her face, and speaks without ornament. "I don't want to be the only route. I want there to be one that works until the others learn it." She glances at Alexander Montgomery, who is trying very hard not to look as if he's waiting for permission to agree. "If you teach me what you know," she adds to Victoria, "I'll teach you what I do without thinking. Then it isn't mine, it's theirs." The sentence hangs, surprising to everyone with its adult common sense. Victoria exhales through her nose, half laugh, half surrender. "You're proposing a protocol we share," she says, and the word share tastes strange in a mouth used to supervise. "A choreography," Mary offers, tentative. Breath, sway, silence in the right places. "You could time it if it helps the hospital sleep at night." Mrs. Whitaker smiles into her tea. "There's expertise," she says, "and there's craft. When they marry up, the children grow." It sounds like something her mother told her, and she told the house, and the house believed. They make a plan on paper that looks almost like music. Alexander holds Sophie, while the nurse with the sensible eyes, name badge reading K-Sing, RNC notes, timings. Victoria contributes the spine, 5-minute windows, escalation pathways, when to pause, when to abandon the attempt. Mary contributes the breath, 4-count sway, hum pitched below speech, the way to place silence like a cushion after a sob, so the next breath arrives clean. "Start with naming," Mary says softly, standing at the doorway in obedience to the ink. Always name them in the first phrase. Sophie, breathe, Isabella was rest, so they know the voice lives in their corner. K. Or sing, writes naming equals orientation, anchors parasympathetic because she has learned to translate kitchen wisdom into clinical. Victoria times the sways on her phone, quarreling gently with herself as the seconds slide past. "Slower than I'd expect," she admits, and Mary nods. "Fast feels like trying. Babies smell trying. Go slow enough to look like certainty." Alexander chokes on a laugh that is also a sob. Certainty, what an expensive word. They practice with Mary outside the threshold. The twins fidget, whimper, test the room for panic. Mary hums a line so low it is almost the thrum of the building's heart. Alexander mirrors the sway. Victoria watches the monitors, narrates what she sees, pulse easing, respiratory rate smoothing, keep the pace. K-Sing adds, note, father's breath sinking is a multiplier. Mrs. Whitaker draws a star so emphatic the paper dents. For the first time, the choreography belongs to all of them expertise carrying craft softening expertise. The room, which has been a courtroom for weeks, feels briefly like a school where everyone is allowed to learn. By late afternoon, a family friend appears a trustee with a gift for philanthropy and headlines. She peeks in, witnesses Alexander settling both twins with the faintest hum leaking under the door, and whispers to Victoria, awed, "This is extraordinary! Whoever found this method, what a miracle!" She means to be kind. Praise, delivered carelessly, is a solvent. "It's a shared protocol," Victoria replies, evenly. It is the right answer and costs her something. The trustee smiles at Mary over the threshold, then at the nurse, then at the doctor. "I'll mention it at the board," she says, a triumph of the team. And her phone is already out, angling for an artless photograph that will look suspiciously like PR. Within hours, a lifestyle blog that feeds on hospital stories posts a tidbit: the Montgomery twins finally sleeping thanks to a miracle maid and a visionary pediatrician. The phrase "miracle maid" lands like glitter and grit. Comments multiply. A local reporter rings the ward phone. Someone asks whether St. Mary's is trialing uncredentialed interventions. Victoria's jaw tightens. Reputations do not sleep through this kind of noise. She gathers the team with the calm of someone who knows how fast glass can shatter. "We proceed exactly as written," she says. "No improvisations, no off-the-cuff heroics. We present results, not romance." She isn't cruel. She is afraid, in a responsible woman's way, of scrutiny that arrives already sure of itself. Mary feels the heat without moving a muscle. She has no hunger for headlines and less for nicknames. In the corridor, a porter walks past humming a tune that accidentally matches hers, and the coincidence makes her smile despite herself. She thinks of ownership, a word that doesn't fit in her mouth, and decides she prefers stewardship. You look after something until it belongs to the people who need it. That evening, they run the protocol once more. This time, with Victoria narrating the steps aloud, as if teaching a class. It works again, which is not magic. It is repetition behaving. Mini cliffhanger. As they pack up, Victoria receives an email stamped "Urgent, Media and Legal." 2 lines in, her face loses a fraction of color. Tomorrow's meeting with the hospital's board has acquired a new agenda item: evaluation of non-credentialed participant, liability and optics. She looks at Mary, at the twins settling, at Alexander's tentative calm, and must decide whether to protect the method by narrowing it or protect the people by widening the fight. Morning arrives, carrying newsprint breath. The lifestyle blog's throwaway line has grown legs. A broadsheet lifts it, trims the sentimentality, and sharpens the angle. At St. Mary's, a miracle maid hums premature twins to sleep. Hospital embraces uncredentialed care. The word uncredentialed sits in the headline like a loose brick above a doorway, ready to fall on whoever walks through first. In the ward office, Victoria Vale reads the piece twice, once as a citizen and once as a clinician who knows how fast a sentence can rewire a week. The phone rings. Communications. Another ring. Legal. A third, a trustee, voice eager, asking whether a photo opportunity might humanize the hospital. Victoria keeps her answers correct and cool. She protects the babies by protecting the process. She protects the process by protecting the language. "No photographs on the ward," she says. "No interviews. We are standardizing a settling protocol with caregiver participation. Nothing more, nothing less." Down the corridor, Mary Collins stands at the vending machine, choosing between crisps she doesn't want and a chocolate bar she cannot taste. A healthcare assistant passes, raises eyebrows. "You're famous." Mary smiles, the way you do when a compliment is a misaddressed letter. Fame is a currency she can't transact. She purchases water and goes dutifully to her square of doorway where the protocol lives in ink and the twins live in bodies. Alexander Montgomery tries to ignore the news by becoming newsproof, eyes only for Isabella's breath, ears only for Sophie's drowsy chest. But his phone slides messages under his skin regardless. Bravo, concerned. Is this safe? Proud of you. What's the liability? Donors never speak directly. Their words arrive wearing suits. He pockets the device and watches. Mary hum Victoria tit, the nurse note. It works, again, which should be all a father needs to know. By noon, an email arrives stamped board prep, risk mitigation. Victoria reads it standing up as if sitting would concede ground. Phrases leap like cold fish, adverse optics, scope of practice, precedent, dependency on a single non-credentialed individual. None of the words address the room where two babies breathe easier when a voice they recognize articulates calm. She adjusts her plan the way captains adjust sails when a wind proves uncooperative. We'll tighten frequency, she tells the team. Fewer intervals, shorter duration. We need to demonstrate independence. Mary accepts the revision without protest. Obedience is the first language she learned. The afternoon session becomes a pared-down rendition of what had begun to feel like music. 2 minutes hum, 3 minutes shadow sway from Alexander, then withdrawal to test resilience. The twins, insulted by the sudden frugality of comfort, protest. Numbers stay nominally safe. The room does not. Again, Victoria says, apologetic but firm, they mustn't require a specific cue. Alexander follows, dutiful and wretched. He feels like a man practicing drowning in hopes of learning breath. Mrs. Agnes Whitaker, who has survived enough tidy theories to recognize one forming, writes in the ledger with a hand that is not as steady as usual. Shortening intervals, agitation rebounds faster. She doesn't add the second sentence that presses at her throat. Cruelty wears reasonable shoes. By late afternoon, the twins are caught in that thin, scratchy state where exhaustion impersonates fury. The protocol, properly performed, asks Mary to step back and remain back. She does. She counts to the agreed number. She stays gone. The crying falters, rallies, frays the edges of everyone's self-control. In the small consultancy room, Victoria meets the administrator from legal. They speak in the genteel dialect of institutions, if provided, contingent upon. We aren't forbidding her, legal says, palms up, innocence laminated. We're clarifying scope. Victoria nods, and somewhere inside her a wire twangs with the force of being stretched. She returns to the family room with a sentence that is both shield and sword. For now, Mary's presence to be limited to one short interval per day. It is defensible. It is also immediately felt as absence. Evening settles like a bruise. The twins refuse peace with the tenacity of the overtired. The room, stripped of the small mercies that were working, becomes a court where everyone is both witness and defendant. Alexander stands with Sophie against his shoulder and feels the clock pull him towards the hour when any parent becomes porous and dangerous. We are doing this to them, he says, not to anyone in particular, because somebody somewhere is afraid of looking foolish. Victoria absorbs the blow because she has armor made of reasons. We're doing this so they learn to soothe without a singular cue, she replies, and it is both true and inadequate. Her voice is gentle. Her decision has teeth. Mary hovers at her assigned distance, the hum trapped behind her teeth like a creature she has pledged not to release. She watches Alexander's hands tremble with the effort of gentleness. She watches Isabella's eyelids flutter without landing. She has never been a mother in the usual way. Tonight she feels like one in the way that costs. "Sir," she says softly, "may I?" "No." Alexander snaps, the word too sharp for the room. It is not meant for her. It finds her anyway. He wants to snatch it back the instant it leaves his mouth. Shame rises fast and thin. "I'm sorry," he adds, rough. I can't bear this performance of caution while they—" Mary nods. She understands being in the path of an arrow designed for a different target. She understands, too, that staying will mean absorbing more misfired pain than anyone has a right to ask. Her usefulness has been rationed by policy. Her presence has been gilded by headlines. Her personhood is somewhere underneath, waiting to be treated as neither threat nor talisman. She fetches her coat from the peg by the staff loo. The fabric smells faintly of detergent and rain. She returns to the doorway and addresses Mrs. Whitaker first, because some orders of respect are not negotiable. "Thank you for letting me help," she says. "You showed me where to stand and when not to take up space. To Victoria, you made it something they can write down. That matters, even when it stings. To Alexander, you are not useless. You are tired. There's a difference." He looks up, stricken. "Mary, please, I'll only be in the way while this is argued out," she says, and the sentence is so free of bitterness that it ought to be framed. "If you need me, once the rules have settled, I'll come back on whatever terms keep the girls safe and the hospital proud." She offers Mrs. Whitaker the ledger, as if returning a borrowed book. The older woman pushes it gently back. "You've written in it," Agnes says. "That makes you family." Mary smiles, small and true. "Then keep me in the margins." She leaves without ceremony, a quiet act that removes exactly the amount of air a person takes up and no more. The corridor swallows her footsteps. In the family room, the twins continue their protest against a world too tidy to notice nuance. Victoria increases the white noise by a notch. That convinces no one. Alexander sits down finally, as if surrender were the only noble thing left to attempt. He covers his face with both hands and breathes as though teaching his ribs to be a cradle. Minnie, cliffhanger. Back at Montgomery House, the post drops through the brass slot. With a well-bred clink on top of the pile sits a letter from the Family Foundations Board. Emergency Session Assessment of Domestic Staffing and Clinical Partners, 9 a.m. The first line names the agenda. The second names Mary Collins. Montgomery House wakes to the kind of quiet that offers no comfort. The nursery hums with its machines, but the air has lost a temperature it wore when Mary Collins stood in the doorway and lent it a pulse. The laminated sign still gleams at the threshold. Rules outlast people. Mrs. Agnes Whitaker lays breakfast with a discipline that makes cutlery sound like reprimand. Alexander Montgomery wanders, cup in hand, forgetting to drink, pausing at doorframes as if a person might be hanging on them like a coat he left behind. He lasts 15 minutes before returning to the nursery to prove to himself, for the 50th time, that the girls are real. Isabella sleeps in tense little increments. Sophie wakes, startles, dozes, the seesaw of children who cannot surrender to rest without a guide. Alexander adjusts the white noise, consults the schedule, becomes a man performing fatherhood in the manner prescribed. Performance is effort. Effort is not the same as ease. He catches his reflection in the glass of the framed christening invitation, a father shaped by paperwork. At Elevenses, Mrs. Whitaker finds him standing with the kettle uncapped, waiting for it to boil without having switched it on. She sets the switch, sets 2 cups, sets her jaw. "Go and fetch her," she says. No preface, no softeners. Before the house learns to live with this brand of quiet. He tries a dozen answers. None pass inspection. "There's a board meeting," he manages. "Optics, liability." Agnes raises an eyebrow that has outlived fancier nonsense. "We're not a press release," she says. "We're a home with babies in it." He doesn't go. Pride and shame are cousins. They hold hands in his chest and politely refuse to budge. He spends the afternoon rehearsing policies as if they might neuter regret. Evening slides in, damp and pale, and the place where Mary used to stand wears its absence like a bandage. By supper the house is obedient to every instruction and unfaithful to the point of care. Doors remain ajar for airflow. Detergents are scentless. Thermometers report in the respectable green. The price of compliance is paid in human coin. Sophie's cry learns a serrated edge. Isabella's breathing picks up a fretful flutter. Alexander moves through the checklist with the stubbornness that kept his ancestors employed. Rock, pat, place down drowsy but awake, step back, wait the recommended number of seconds, resist rescue. He resists so well the resisting becomes an ideology. Once, twice, 3 times he almost phones Mary. Each almost is interrupted by an adult consideration, the foundation's letter, the hospital's scrutiny, his own appalling knack for believing the last person who sounded certain. He sits on the nursery carpet and teaches himself to inhale for 4, exhale for 6, because a book said this would make him a better instrument for his daughter's calm. It works for 3 breaths, then fails where most fine advice fails at the point where children aren't theoretical. At 6:30, Agnes brings shepherd's pie and common sense. "Eat," she orders. He doesn't. "Apologize," she adds. He won't. "Do you want to be right?" she asked finally. "Or do you want your daughters to sleep?" The question lands like a key on a table he's refused to see. He opens his mouth to answer, and upstairs, the monitor emits a small, unfriendly ping. Sophie goes rigid, the breath held with the cunning of a child who has learned that air is a negotiable. Isabella, insulted by the sudden terror in the room, adds her own protest. The sound is wrong. It is absence pretending to be noise. Alexander is through the door in an instant that costs him more than minutes. He lifts Sophie, whispers the prescribed phrases, counts the sanctioned counts, offers the approved sways. It is like reading a map of a city while standing in a different one entirely. "Mary," he says aloud, and the name unmoors something he has been strapping to the floor. For a fracture of time, Sophie softens, then spikes again, the heart's sawtooth made audible. Agnes is already dialing. The ambulance route is muscle memory now. She covers the pram with a blanket, the window with a calmer sentence. "We need her," Alexander says, not to Agnes, not to any god he half remembers, but to the sum of the choices that brought him here. He does not wait for the siren to argue with the street. He picks up his coat, leaves his phone on the sideboard where a responsible man might have kept it, and steps into the wet. The night meets him with that peculiar London drizzle that soaks without appearing to fall at all. He runs. He does not know Mary's address with the precision respectable men keep in their heads. He knows the bus route that took her away, the turnstile she prefers, the parade of shops that sell what lives are built on: bread, batteries, cheap umbrellas. He tries the cleaners on Cartwright Street. The landlady nods him towards a terrace where steps run slick as confession. Mary answers the knock because kindness makes fools of cautious people. She smells of laundry and rain, hair pulled back in the way of women who need their hands. "Sir," she says, because the habit of the house won't abandon her at her own door. He does not bother to organize his apology into the tense little sentences he learned at prep school. "I was proud," he says, "and afraid, and wrong. I thought the right thing was the rule. The right thing is you in the house. Please, Cat." Mary looks past him at the night, which has opinions of its own, and back at his face, which has finally laid its weapons down. She glances at the small hold-all by the shoe rack that she hasn't yet unpacked. "Terms," she says, not unkindly. "Respect, boundaries, credit shared, and I won't stand alone in front of men who think safety is a posture. If I come, it's because we are all teaching and all learning." He nods so fiercely the rain shakes loose from his hair. "Yes," he manages. And the word is not policy. It is a promise minted under duress, which is the only kind worth much. They step out together. The city's lights smudge into a gentler geometry. Back at the house, Agnes lifts Sophie and says Mary's name, into the child's ear the way a password is spoken. Somewhere beyond sirens and signatures, a family practices the trick of becoming one. Mini cliffhanger. As Alexander and Mary turn into Montgomery Square, the house lights blink. Then a taxi pulls up at the curb. To Victoria Vale steps out, eyes on a folded agenda from the morning's emergency session. She looks up, takes in the pair returning through the rain, and has to decide in real time at the door whether to arrive as gatekeeper or ally. At the front steps, 3 people pause under the thin shelter of the portico. Alexander Montgomery, dripping rain and contrition, Mary Collins with her small hold-all and a steadiness borrowed from kitchen floors, to Victoria Vale, dry under a taxi's discipline, agenda folded like a blade she hasn't decided to open. The door yields to Mrs. Agnes Whitaker before anyone can knock. "Good," she says, as if they were late for a reasonable future. Inside, babies first, speeches after. In the lamplight of the hall, Alexander turns to Mary and does something he has avoided since childhood. He asks simply and out loud for forgiveness without applying varnish. "I was wrong," he says. "I protected appearances over the girls. I put you in the path of other people's fear and called it prudence. If you return, it will be on terms you set, and I will back them in rooms where kindness is treated like a rumor." The words cost him, and therefore count. Mary listens the way a person listens for weather tone, direction, likelihood. "I'm not coming back to be your loophole," she replies, gentle but exact. "I'm coming back to be part of a method that belongs to the girls, not to me. Respect in the open, credit shared, boundaries observed. If any of that buckles, I walk without drama, and you will not mistake my silence for consent. She doesn't raise her voice. The precision does the work. Victoria watches this with a clinician's habit of naming forces. The apology is clean. The terms are sound. The moment asks whether she will defend a fence or redraw a map. She lowers the agenda. Mrs. Whitaker, she says, let's set the environment. Doorway protocol with auditory presence, father-led sway, nurse supervision. We'll document deviations as co-authored decisions. It is a public choosing. Agnes gives the smallest nod, the kind you grant at weddings when people marry the right idea. They climb. At the nursery threshold, Mary stops to wash her hands at the little sink, sleeves rolled, motions practiced. She honors the rules because she intends to bend none of them by stealth. She takes her square of doorway. Alexander lifts Sophie. The room awaits its lesson. What follows is not a miracle. It is choreography written in 3 handwritings. Victoria sets the metronome in her head and, for once, keeps it out of her mouth. Name first, Mary reminds softly, and Alexander obeys. Sophie, breathe. Isabella, rest. He hears his own voice as if borrowed from a steadier man. He sways to the 4-count Mary taught, slower than pride would choose, faster than despair. Mrs. Whitaker opens the ledger to a clean page titled Montgomery Care Shared Protocol, and writes as though the act itself could anchor a household. Step 1. Orientation. Name plus hand on own heart. Step 2. Father breath sync. Step 3. Mary hum. Doorway sub-speech pitch. Step 4. Silence placed like cushion. Step 5. Nurse oversight. Notes. Kay Singh arrives on the late shift, takes in the tableau, and slips into the work with the grace of someone who prefers usefulness to applause. Within minutes, the twins yield. Not fully, no honest method promises that, but enough that the room changes temperature. Isabella's forehead loosens. Sophie's fists uncurl as if they have remembered another profession besides clenching. The monitor's tidy green handwriting calms to legible. Victoria steps closer without crossing the emotional line. Add cease hum at 90 seconds to test carry, she murmurs. Mary complies. Alexander's sway holds. The babies wobble. Consider rebellion. Decide against it. Good, Victoria says, and the word good means precisely what it ought. Not victory, not ownership, simply the right direction. They document the plan as a living thing. Variables, tolerances, escape routes when nights grow teeth. They agree on language that respects everyone's part, auditory co-regulation for the hum, paternal entrainment for the sway, domestic observational data for Agnes's stars. Each phrase is a small bridge over a ditch where arguments like to breed. By 10 o'clock, the room is ordinary in the way peace is ordinary when it stays unshowy, inevitable, the kind of ordinary that used to feel like a luxury. Alexander puts Sophie down, drowsy but actually ready, and steps back without that theatrical bravery he practiced yesterday. The girls sleep as if sleep is now a native tongue. At the kitchen table, they turn the protocol into a document destined to be read under strip lights by people who prefer summaries to stories. Victoria types, Mary dictates the parts that live in muscle memory, Agnes checks for sense, Kay Singh sprinkles the right acronyms so the hospital won't develop hives. Alexander signs not as Lord of the House, but as the father whose name is on the birth certificates and the bills. He adds a paragraph titled Safeguards, Rotating Staff, Familiarization, Nightly Review, Explicit Credit Across Roles. Escalation writes, if any party feels the method is being politicized or diluted into performance. Mary draws one firm boundary in ink. No photographs, she says. The girls are not case studies in search of a flattering angle. Victoria meets her eye. Agreed. Agnes underlines the line as if underlining were a spell. When the document is printed, it looks almost shy. 6 pages that say, we noticed a pattern. We listened to bodies. We wrote the listening down. Victoria attaches the ledger photos as appendices, then, on a quiet impulse that surprises even her, writes at the top, authors, V. Vale, M. Collins, A. Montgomery, A. Whitaker, K. Singh, RNC. It is a redistribution of authorship that could make certain rooms itch. She does it anyway. They rehearse the morning's answers. Why a non-credentialed participant? Because the stimulus belongs to the baby's nervous systems. We codified it so it can be taught. What about dependency? The protocol trains transfer. Father leads, nurse supervises, hum steps down over days. Is this safe? Measured, documented, reversible, outcomes recorded, infection control intact. What if it becomes a media circus? It won't. The family declines coverage. The hospital leads with evidence, not adjectives. At the end, Mary closes her notebook, not the hospital's, her own, bought for 99 pence at the corner shop, and says the thing that neither policy nor poetry can tidy away. If tomorrow's room asks me to vanish to keep everyone comfortable, she says, I will. But I won't pretend vanishing is neutral. Some comforts cost children. The sentence lands like an anchor. Everyone at the table feels the floor steady. Mini cliffhanger, 0859, Hospital Boardroom B. The door opens. Trustees in good suits, the legal officer with her careful frown, communications with a smile like a seatbelt. At the far end, an empty chair marked Guest, Community Care Representative, waits. The usher looks up. Ms. Collins? He asks. Mary glances at Victoria, at Alexander, at Agnes's quietly blazing face, then steps towards the chair that either names her or tests her. Boardroom B smells faintly of coffee and carpet decisions. Trustees arrange their expressions into neutrality. Legal places a neat stack of cautions on the table as if laying out cutlery. Communications wears a smile, calibrated to say, we are already reasonable. At the far end, the chair labeled Guest, Community Care Representative, waits for a woman who buys her notebooks for 99 pence and keeps time with a kettle. To Victoria Vale opens. She does not plead. She reports. We present a settling protocol co-authored across roles, outcomes, reduced distress, improved sleep intervals, stable vitals, paternal participation strengthened, controls, infection measures intact, no physical contact by non-clinical staff, clearly defined durations, step-downs to prevent dependency, documentation attached. She looks briefly at Mary Collins, then at the ledger photocopies that brought a kitchen table into a hospital cloud. Questions arrive on small wheels. Scope of practice? Asks legal. Liability? Asks a trustee whose cufflinks are brighter than his curiosity. Precedent? Asks communications, already drafting sentences that could be safely quoted. Alexander Montgomery stands when he doesn't strictly need to and speaks without ornament. My daughters breathe easier when this method is used. The hospital has refined it. Mary initiated it. I perform it. Nurses oversee it. I am asking you to recognize a truth my house learned before my head did. Some care lives first in bodies, then in paperwork. Please let the paperwork catch up. A pause, and then a question designed to sound fair. Ms. Collins, the chair says, can you explain what you do in terms this hospital can own? Mary is not a woman who enjoys owning anything. She folds her hands. I hum, she says simply, at a pitch lower than speech, and I keep time with breath. I place silences where fear usually goes and give that space back to the child. We've written it down so anyone can do it. If you need a word for it, use Dr. Vale's auditory co-regulation. But don't file it until you've seen a baby listen. Cabbage. Singh, RN, adds a sentence that lands like an affidavit. When father's breathing synchronizes, outcomes multiply. We teach it. We measure it. This is not mystique. It's nervous systems learning a common tempo. The chair lifts her pen, lowers it. Very well, she says. Pilot the protocol under governance, with Mary Collins designated as Community Care Representative for training transfer, only no physical contact. All sessions supervised and recorded. Review in 4 weeks with the outcomes and a step-down plan. Legal nods, contingencies satisfied. Communications relaxes by a millimeter, headline tamed. Victoria allows herself a breath that looks like nothing at all. Mary feels neither triumph nor defeat, only the peculiar rightness of having placed a chair where a wall used to be. After the vote, life declines to become a montage. It becomes work done well again and again until work feels like weather. The protocol hangs laminated beside the nursery door at Montgomery House, and in smaller letters, in the family room at St. Mary's, names appear at the top as authors, not footnotes. Agnes Whitaker's stars share a page number with arterial oxygen saturation graphs. Kate Singh's annotations sit beside Alexander's penciled reminders, slower than pride, quicker than despair. Evenings acquire a rhythm that does not fear being broken. Alexander leads the sway with a competence that embarrasses him less each day. He learns where to place the silence like a cushion, learns when to step away without turning the stepping into theater. On nights when the edges fray, Mary takes her square a doorway, hums for the permitted 90 seconds, then fades back into the corridor like a good idea that wants other people to own it. The twins, being human, sometimes refuse all of this. The protocol includes the right to call it a night and try again tomorrow. Mercy is written into the margins. At the hospital, Victoria delivers an in-service, auditory co-regulation, and paternal entrainment in neonatal settling. She resists adjectives. She offers data and an invitation. She ends, to her own surprise, with a line that sounds suspiciously like gratitude. The method began in a house, she says. It became ours because we paid attention. The lifestyle blog tries for a sequel. Communications declines. The family prefers outcomes to optics, they say, and for once a sentence is allowed to be enough. In the kitchen, At Montgomery House, Agnes tapes a fresh page into the ledger, Girl's First Full Night, and returns the book to its drawer, between recipes and warranties. Things that matter live together. Spring leans on London. The rain grows warmer. The park understands itself again. On a weekday afternoon, too ordinary to remember, Alexander takes the twins for a walk. Isabella drowses with great seriousness. Sophie studies pigeons as if preparing a thesis. Back home, Mary wedges open the back door and shelves dry bowls, humming to the washing up because old habits do not argue with new roles. Agnes potters, remorseless in her care. Victoria arrives later, not with a clipboard, but with a paperback she thinks Mary might like. They stand in the garden and talk about nothing dramatic, which is how friendship sometimes admits itself. When evening draws the house into its softer geometry, the ritual begins without fanfare. Names first, breath next, a hum that doesn't need to be louder than the room, silence placed with respect, hands that are allowed to be ordinary and therefore useful. The twins settle like boats, coming home to a harbor that is both mapped and felt. Before he switches off the lamp, Alexander writes a line at the bottom of the printed protocol where there is no space for poetry, and he writes it anyway. Sometimes the medicine is a human rhythm. Teach it, share it. Do not hoard what works. He signs his name, and then below it writes 5 more. V. Vale, M. Collins, A. Whitaker, K. Singh, Isabella and Sophie, who taught us first. The house sleeps, not as victory, but as practice. It will have bad nights because life insists. It will have good ones because people insisted back. The laminated sign remains at the door, an artifact of a necessary caution, but no longer reads like a commandment. It reads like context. What matters is inside the room, a father learning, a maid who was never only a maid, a doctor who chose authorship over ownership, a nurse who caught the first proof, an older woman who kept the ledger of small truths, and 2 children whose breath rewrote the rules. If this story kept you company tonight, stay with our channel for more quiet, human tales from across the United Kingdom. When you have a moment, leave a line below about the carer you learned from. We read every note, and some become the next film. If someone you know might sleep easier for hearing this, pass it on. And if you'd like these stories to find you again, subscribe and let the bell do the remembering.